Immediately go to the nearest room and lock and barricade the door. Stay low and stay quiet. I went to a somewhat typical high school, not in a traditional American suburb, but a more rural set high school. Some kids go to schools with graduating classes of like 500 to hell, even 1,000 kids. My high school had, I think, a little less than 200 kids in my graduating class. It was the kind of high school where even if you weren't friends with someone, you still knew them by face and name. Walking down the hallways, you'd know basically 99% of your peers, at least in your own graduating class. Coming from a quiet town, there weren't a lot of crazy news stories really. It was pretty uneventful there. What we did for fun after school was actually go out and play sports and ride our bikes around and stuff like that. This was like 17 years ago though, so I guess things may be a lot different these days for kids. Another thing I always felt that was unique about our school was that there didn't really seem to be any bullying for the most part. Like at least not the typical cliché movie style bullying where kids are getting pushed into lockers or having their lunch money stolen. When I think back now, I can't really name a single kid from my graduating class who could be labeled as a bully. Sure, there were kids who just tease others, but nothing too serious. Of course, there were quiet kids in our grade, like every school has, but there was one kid in my grade who literally never spoke at all. I'm going to just name him Luke for this story. He wasn't even a weird-looking kid or anything. He seemed pretty nice to people who went out of their way to interact with him. I shared one class with him, though. It was an elective that had kids from all 4 grades in it. Luke and I were juniors when this happened. This elective was a computer class, and back when this happened, the computer rooms in our high school were still rocking those big, bulky box computers. I remember the layout of this classroom. There was the hall in the middle separating 2 columns of tables, and the 2 columns had 4 rows each. Each row had 4 seats, and each student had their own computer. This class wasn't full, so there were probably like 26 filled seats out of 32. Luke always sat in the second row in the furthest seat to the left with no one next to him, as everyone else sat with people they knew from their respective grades. Unfortunately, not long into the semester, the seniors in the class started collectively picking on Luke. By this I mean some of the seniors would make jokes about how quiet Luke was, that it was scary when the teacher would ask certain things. For whatever reason, our teacher never stood up for Luke and told them to cut it out. The teacher was a bit of a pushover from what I remember. Maybe that was why. As the semester went on, it got a little worse. I remember at one point seeing a small piece of paper fly from the back row from the seniors right to the back of Luke's head. I remember he turned around and had this very telling look. The seniors continued to make fun, one of them saying, "Wasn't me," and blaming one of the other seniors. The look on Luke's face just looked like a mix of sadness, anger, and just defeatedness. I genuinely felt bad, but I didn't get involved. Eventually, one day, I saw Luke sitting on a curb not far from the high school after school ended one day. I passed by him as I was walking to my car. I have an early birthday, so I was driving around halfway through junior year. Given we were in a quiet area, no one was exactly walking distance from school. So, I did the right thing and said, "What's up?" and asked if he needed a ride home. His face literally lit up a bit as he said yes. We walked to my car and from there on he guided me to his house. It was about a 10-minute drive to his house. We talked a lot during that car ride. I told him he should just ignore the seniors in our computer class. I said they're a bunch of deadbeats anyway. He said they're not the only ones that he's sick of. He implied that he deals with people picking on him in multiple classes, which honestly made me feel pretty terrible for him. In those 10 minutes, I felt like I learned a lot about Luke and got to know him as a person just a bit. And he seemed like a decent kid. As I dropped him off, I made a comment to him about how close we lived. And then we said goodbye. Every day in class after that, we'd say hey to each other, but admittedly I unfortunately never got involved whenever he got picked on. Well, one day Luke didn't show up to class. Computer class was 4th period. It wasn't until 7th period English that an announcement came over the loudspeaker saying, "Lockdown. This is not a drill." I remember everyone looking around nervously, and I remember our teacher looking the most nervous. She ran to turn off the lights and told everyone to hurry to one corner of the room. Seeing how nervous our teacher was only made all the students even more nervous. We sat with the lights off for a long time. It had to be 20 to 30 minutes until there was another message on the loudspeaker. It was the principal explaining that there was someone in a mask carrying a black duffel bag trying to get into the school. Our school had really good security, and when someone spotted that person approaching the school with what could only be assumed to be guns or any kind of weapons in that duffel bag, the doors were all locked. The school day was cut short after that once a few police cars were on the scene. I remember it being a Friday, so I took a few of my friends home to my house so we could hang out. I'd be lying if I said I remember the small details thereafter of that day. But I think it was that same night that I woke up in the middle of the night to light tapping at my window, and I could see someone on the other side of the glass. I started freaking out, and before running to get my dad, I took a closer look and then said, "Who is it?" I heard Luke's voice as he said his name. I felt like my heart dropped the second time. I went over to the window and lifted it just a crack. I said, "What are you doing? How did you find me?" And he said, "Through the window. I tried to do something bad." And it instantly clicked. I mean it. It instantly clicked in my head that it was him. Before he could even tell me, I said, "Was it you who caused the lockdown?" And he said, "Yes." I was scared to ask him what he was planning on doing. Instead, I asked him how he found me. He admitted to remembering the deli that I said I lived by, and he eventually found my car after biking around the area. That explanation didn't make it any less disturbing. Luke asked me if he could come in and talk about what he planned on doing, and I said, "No, I cannot let him in, nor can I hear what he planned on doing." I actually recommended he go to the school and confess to whatever he was going to do. And when he refused to walk away from my window, I said, "Dad," really loudly, which worked in scaring him off. I went to my parents' room and woke them up to tell them. My mom was the one who insisted on calling the police. She was distraught. When a police officer eventually came, I had no choice but to tell the truth. I gave Lucas identity and I explained that he had just come to my window admitting to potentially almost doing something horrible at the school. Obviously, the police were already aware of the lockdown, so I believe police were sent to his house that night. But after speaking with Luke's parents, they realized Luke wasn't there. I believe it was the next day that Luke was either found or he just returned home and police were still waiting there, and he confessed to what he told me. As far as our graduating class knew, Luke was charged with something like making a terroristic threat. I know he did time and I know he's been out a long time. To be honest, I don't really know if he's still around. Part of me always wanted to feel bad for Luke, witnessing how loneliness and getting picked on can probably eat away at someone. He followed me and came to me simply because I showed him an act of kindness. Something I unfortunately believe nobody else showed him. Still, the fact that he admitted to bringing a gun to school with a mask on, even if he didn't admit to intending on carrying out the implied threat, I can't fully believe he simply came to the school with a gun just to scare people. I think he for a split second had a horrible plan and got cold feet and regretted it. I just hope Luke eventually got the help he needed. This happened in 2016 back when I was in 5th grade. If you remember that year, you probably remember all the killer clown sightings that were happening around the country. This happened to me when I was in the 5th grade back in 2012, living in New York City. Even after all these years, it still feels strange to talk about. But I think people, especially parents, need to hear it. Because sometimes, the people you trust around your kids aren't who they seem. It was late September, one of those crisp, breezy afternoons that feel more like fall than summer. School had just started a couple weeks ago, and everything felt normal. My routine was simple. Right after class, I'd head straight to the playground, kick around a soccer ball, and stay there until my mom called me home. That day was no different until it was. I was mid-game, sprinting after the ball, when my foot caught awkwardly on the turf. I hit the ground hard. Before I could even push myself back up, a hand reached out. I looked up and saw a boy I didn't recognize. He smiled and introduced himself as Tony. Said he just moved to the neighborhood and this was his first week at our school. He seemed friendly enough, quiet, but polite. We started talking more during recess, teamed up for games, and quickly became friends. He told me he lived just a few blocks away. At the time, that made things easier. I didn't realize it then, but meeting Tony was the moment everything started to change. My parents met Tony briefly when they picked me up from school, and they seemed comfortable knowing I had a new friend nearby. About 2 weeks later, on a Saturday morning, my parents and I decided to go hiking in Bear Mountain, north of the city. We usually didn't see anyone we knew up there, but strangely enough, about halfway through our hike, we bumped into Tony and his dad. It felt like a pleasant coincidence at first. Tony's dad introduced himself as Michael. He was tall, smiling, and had this reassuring, easygoing manner that instantly put my parents at ease. They chatted for a while, and at one point, Michael casually asked my parents if they'd be comfortable letting me sleep over at their house sometime soon. My mom seemed a bit hesitant at first, but Michael reassured them, saying they'd supervise carefully. Eventually, seeing how friendly and responsible Michael appeared, my parents agreed. So about a week later, on a Friday evening, I walked over to Tony's house for my first ever sleepover with him. The house looked normal, cozy even, but something about it just felt a little off. I pushed those thoughts away quickly, blaming it on nerves since this was my first sleepover at a friend's place. At first, everything went smoothly. We played video games, had pizza for dinner, and talked about soccer. Around 10 p.m., Tony's dad came in and gently reminded us to sleep soon. We settled into Tony's room, which was upstairs, and eventually drifted off. Sometime later, I woke up suddenly. I wasn't sure what had startled me, but then I heard voices from downstairs, multiple voices, muffled and urgent. I nudged Tony awake and whispered to him about the sounds. Tony just shrugged, sleepy-eyed, and said his parents probably had guests. Then his dad's voice called out sharply, demanding that Tony come downstairs immediately. Tony looked slightly annoyed but went anyway, leaving me alone in the dimly lit room. Suddenly feeling uneasy, I got up and quietly locked the bedroom door just to be safe. A few minutes passed, and the voices downstairs grew louder, angrier. Footsteps echoed heavily on the wooden stairs, approaching Tony's bedroom. I froze, heart pounding, listening as someone stopped right outside the door. Then came a knock, harder than a normal knock. It was almost aggressive. Tony's voice calmly asked me to unlock the door, reassuring me that everything was okay. But there was something strange about how calm he sounded amidst the chaotic noises downstairs. I didn't answer, pretending to still be asleep. Then another voice, deeper and harsher, shouted through the door, demanding I open up immediately. My heart raced. Panicking, I grabbed my phone and sent my parents a hurried, broken text that just said, "I'm scared. Lock doors. Come quick," before I could finish typing. More clearly, loud pounding began on the door, violent and forceful this time, making the entire room shake. I scrambled into the closet, trembling uncontrollably, hiding under piles of clothes, breathing as quietly as possible. Seconds later, I heard wood splintering, the door breaking apart. Heavy footsteps stormed into the room. A flashlight beam swept across the closet door, and suddenly it flung open. A large man I'd never seen before reached inside and roughly pulled me out. I kicked and struggled, but he easily dragged me downstairs. My eyes widened in shock when I saw a black van waiting outside, engine running. Tony stood silently beside his dad, not looking at me at all. My mind was racing. I realized what was happening. They were kidnapping me. But then I saw headlights pulling into the driveway, my dad's familiar sedan. Relief flooded through me, though it was quickly replaced by terror when the man holding me pulled out a handgun, pressing it against my side. My dad jumped out, holding his own safety gun, shouting at them to let me go. The man holding me warned my dad to drop his weapon or he'd teach me a lesson. In that awful moment, by sheer luck, a patrol car drove by. The police officers immediately noticed something was wrong. They shouted commands, drew their weapons, and tackled the two men swiftly, arresting both on the spot. Tony's dad was cuffed and thrown into the back seat as well, protesting loudly as they took him away. The days following that nightmare were a blur. Police officers regularly visited our home, informing my parents about the ongoing investigation. The scariest part, though, the detectives said Tony had helped his father in previous incidents. He wasn't some innocent kid caught in his dad's nightmare. He had been part of it all along. That realization still haunts me the most. The realtor called it a handyman special, but the truth was, I'd bought the old Victorian on Oak Street because it was the only thing in my budget, a sprawling, silent monument to someone else's forgotten life. The first night, the silence was absolute. The second night, the arguing began. It started as a low murmur, a distant radio drama bleeding through the floorboards. I'd pause, my heart thumping, straining to hear. But the moment I focused, it would stop, leaving only the settling groans of the old house. I told myself it was the plumbing, the wind whistling through a loose soffit. But by the fourth night, the voices grew clearer, more distinct. A man's voice, deep and frayed with a constant, simmering anger. A woman's, pleading, tearful. And sometimes, just sometimes, the high, thin sound of a child crying. They were always downstairs. Always in the living room. I'd lie frozen in my bed upstairs, the covers pulled to my chin, listening to the ghost of a family feud that had outlasted the walls containing it. I'd catch phrases, whispered and sharp. "We can't just leave it, Martha," the man would snap. "He knows, I know he knows." The woman would sob back. The child's cries were the worst, a sound of pure, helpless terror that made my skin prickle. During the day, the house was just a house. Sunlight streamed through the dusty windows, illuminating the floating dust motes. I'd sand floors and patch walls, trying to drown out the memory of the night with the whir of power tools. But I started noticing things. A cold spot in the center of the living room that no amount of sunlight could warm. The faint, sweet and sour smell of old perfume and pipe tobacco that would appear out of nowhere and vanish. Just as quickly, one afternoon, I was repairing a section of baseboard in the living room. I pulled away a rotten piece of wood, and something clattered onto the hardwood floor. It was a small, tarnished silver locket. Inside was a faded photograph of a woman with sad eyes and a little boy with a forced smile. My blood ran cold. They were real. The voices had faces. That night, the argument was louder than ever. It wasn't a murmur anymore. It was a full-blown fight, happening right below my feet. I could hear the thump of a fist on a table, the sharp crack of something breaking, maybe a dish. The woman was weeping uncontrollably. "Please, David, don't. Think of Michael," I knew. Colder terror seized me. This wasn't just a residual echo. This was happening now. Driven by a fear I couldn't name, I crept out of bed and down the top few stairs. The living room was pitch black, but the voices were crystal clear, swirling from the darkness. "It's the only way," the man, David, roared. He saw everything. "We're already buried here," a child's voice. Michael shrieked. "No. Daddy, no." I fumbled for my phone, turning on the flashlight. The beam cut through the blackness, shaking with the tremor in my hand. The room was empty. The voices didn't stop. They weren't coming from the room. They were happening in the room, all around me, a chaotic symphony of anguish from a point in time I couldn't see. "He's in the wall," the woman screamed, her voice shredding with hysteria. "My baby is in the wall." The flashlight beam swept across the far wall, the one I'd been repairing. And for a single, heart-stopping second, I saw them. Not full figures, but impressions, a shimmer of light outlining a tall man's furious stance, a woman collapsed on her knees, and a small, faint shadow cowering in the corner. The air grew freezing cold, and the smell of pipe tobacco was so strong it made my eyes water. Then, silence, abrupt and absolute. The light from my phone was just a light again, illuminating an empty, dusty living room. I stood there, shaking, the words echoing in my head. "He's in the wall." I ran upstairs and haven't come down since. The sun is rising now, casting long, innocent beams across the floor, but I can't hear it. I can't see it. And I know, with a certainty that chills me to my soul, that the family never moved out. They're still here, trapped in their final, terrible moment. And now, so am I. I'm staring at the living room wall from the staircase, and from deep within the plaster and lathe, I swear I can hear a new sound, faint and desperate. It's the sound of a little boy, scratching. A mile back, a pair of headlights appeared in my rearview to pinpricks of white in the undisturbed darkness, and no matter how many turns I took or how much I pressed the gas, they never seemed to draw closer. Each mile should have brought them forward or let them fall away. But they simply hovered, unblinking, silent, impossibly steady. The road home winds through backcountry far from streetlights or gas stations, a slithering black ribbon flanked on both sides by dense woods and empty fields, where the night air smells thick of rain-soaked asphalt and wet leaves. My dashboard clock glowed. 12:47 a.m. as I left my friend's house, headlights splashing against the blackness. The radio was all static and late-night whispers, so I drove in silence, the tires humming on rough pavement. About 10 minutes in, I glanced in the mirror. That's when I noticed them. Headlights, a good half-mile behind, and wavering as I took the next bend. I slowed for the next intersection, no turn signal. Not a soul on the shoulder, yet there they were, always the same distance behind me. After the second sharp turn, a winding section where the forest leans close and tree limbs claw the sky, I looked back. Still there. I blinked, gripping the wheel tighter, the leather warm from my palms. I eased off the gas, heart thumping louder than the engine. The lights inched no nearer. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe someone else heading home late. A neighbor, maybe. But no one takes this road unless they have a reason. My knees deepened when I flicked on my high beams and turned onto a narrow, twisting cutoff, just to test whether the car would follow. The headlights remained exactly as before, gleaming steadily in the void, never gaining an inch. The air inside the car grew claustrophobic, tinged with the coppery scent of my own nervous sweat. Out in the fields, mist pressed low to the ground. I cracked my window, letting in the cool, damp air, hoping for a distant barn light, a fox in the underbrush, any sign of normal life. Every time I checked the mirror, the headlights stared back. Sometimes they seemed farther away. Sometimes they swelled brighter, then faded, almost as if pulsing with the pounding of my heart. But the distance never truly changed. My mind raced. I cycled through every rational excuse. Maybe it was a trick of the bends, the glass, the moonlight warping reality, yet every swerve, every side street led to the same outcome. No closer, never gone. I tried the radio to drown out the silence, but it fizzed with static, an undercurrent of soft whispers I couldn't quite make out. The further I drove, the stranger the air felt in my lungs, thick, metallic, scraping the back of my throat like cold steel. I refused to look directly out the back window, only ever stealing glances in the mirror, the idea of catching even a glimpse of seeing the shape inside those lights filled me with a slow, knowing dread. I focused on my hands, the vibrations of the steering wheel as the car devoured each mile marker. At the final crossroad before my street, I stopped, engine humming, breathing shallow. I stared forward into the inky void and counted to 10. The headlights waited, gleaming and patient, and suddenly, I realized I could no longer recall when they first appeared. Had they always been there, waiting for me, tailing every midnight journey? I took the last turn, gravel crunching under my tires, and pulled up outside my apartment building. The headlights hovered at the horizon, and moving, I sat motionless, hands locked on the wheel, afraid to look back one more time. Inside, I locked every door and watched through the curtains. The road beyond my parking lot shimmered empty under a broken street lamp. No sign of any car or person, but when I turned off my bedroom light and crawled beneath the sheets, I could still see the afterimage of those headlights, twin pinpoints of white waiting beyond the window, never drifting closer, never fading away. Now, every night as I drive home, I search the mirror, dreading the moment those lights blink into existence again, knowing deep down they're not really following me, they're waiting. And whatever they want, it's patient. It knows, eventually, I'll have to look back. The morgue is the quietest place in the entire hospital, a kingdom of chilled silence where the only sound is the hum of refrigeration units and the quiet, final click of a body bag being sealed. I should know. I was the one who zipped him in. His name was John Doe. A vagrant brought in after a hit and run. No ID, no family. Just another sad story that ended on a cold stainless steel table in there. I'd done the paperwork, tagged his toe, and wheeled him down myself. The elevator ride to the basement was its own kind of ritual. The fluorescent lights flickering as we descended into that perpetual, artificial winter. I remember the weight of him as I transferred him from the gurney to the cold storage drawer, the metallic shriek of the rollers as I slid him into the dark. I locked it. I always lock them. The call from security came at 6 a.m., just as my shift was ending. My replacement, a young guy named Leo, found it. The drawer was ajar, the bag unzipped, and empty. My first stupid thought was a prank, or a horrific paperwork mix-up, but then they mentioned the cameras. The morgue has one security camera, a dusty black dome in the corner, meant to deter. Well, I don't know what it was meant to deter, until that morning. It had never recorded anything but us orderlies moving with tired, respectful silence. The head of security, a grim man named Henderson, pulled me into his cramped, coffee-stained office. The air was thick with the smell of stale sweat and electronics. He didn't say a word, just pointed a meaty finger at the monitor and hit play. The timestamp read 3:14 a.m. The footage was grainy, washed in monochrome green from the night vision. It showed the wall of stainless steel drawers, silent and still. For a long moment, nothing. Then, a sound from the speaker made me jump, a slow, metallic scrape. It was the sound of the latch on John Doe's drawer disengaging from the inside. The drawer slid open, not with the force of a person pulling it, but slowly, deliberately, as if pushed by something lying within. The black body bag shifted. A tremor ran through the thick plastic, then another, a weak, spasmodic jerking. The zipper began to move. From the inside, it slid down, inch by agonizing inch. Revealing the dark opening, a hand emerged, pale, waxy. The fingers curled like claws. It gripped the edge of the bag, and a figure began to sit up. It was him, John Doe, his head lolled on a neck that looked too broken to support it. One side of his face was a ruin of bruises and deep abrasions from the accident. But his eyes were wide open. They didn't blink, they just stared ahead, reflecting the camera's light with a flat, tail-like sheen. He moved with a terrible, broken grace. He swung his legs over the side of the drawer, his bare feet slapping softly on the cold linoleum. He stood, swaying slightly, a marionette with its strings cut. He took a step, then another, his gait a stiff, shuffling limp. He didn't look around. He didn't seem to be looking at anything at all. He just walked, with a dreadful purpose, directly toward the camera. He passed right beneath it, and the footage ended. The silence in the room was absolute. Henderson finally spoke, his voice a dry rasp. "We've searched the entire basement. Nothing. Doors were all locked from the inside." How did he just walk away? I couldn't answer. All I could see was the image of that broken man moving with a certainty that the dead should not possess. He wasn't confused. He wasn't disoriented. He was leaving. I went home that morning, but sleep was impossible. The image was burned onto the back of my eyelids. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him shuffling through that green-tinted world. I kept my own lights on, jumping at every creak of the house settling. It was around 3 in the afternoon when my doorbell rang. The CCTV camera for my porch, a paranoid purchase after a string of neighborhood break-ins sends a notification straight to my phone. My heart, already a frantic bird in my chest, nearly stopped. I opened the app. The live feed showed my empty porch swing, my wilted petunias, and then a figure shuffled into the frame. He stood there, on my welcome mat, facing my front door. It was him. He still wore the standard issue hospital gown, now stained with dirt and grass. His head was tilted at that same impossible angle, his ruined face a mask in the afternoon sun. He just stood there, not ringing the bell again, not moving, just waiting. And as I watched, frozen in my darkened hallway, the figure on my screen slowly lifted its head, those flat, glassy eyes seemed to look directly up through the lens and find mine. His mouth, a bloody cut in his pale face, stretched into a small, knowing smile. Then the video feed cut to black.